She said it so calmly. "We're leaving tomorrow, Mom. I sold your beach house." My name wasn't even on the papers anymore. I should have screamed. I didn't, because what she didn't know was that every signature she forged had already been rewritten by me. She thought she'd taken my home. She never realized she'd just walked into my lesson. My dear listeners, thank you for being here. If stories of love, loss, and second chances speak to your heart, please subscribe to the channel and tap that like button. It truly helps us share more stories like this one. I always find it beautiful to see where you're listening from. So drop your city or country in the comments below, and let's see how far this story can travel across the world. Now please get comfortable, because what you're about to hear is a story about forgiveness, lessons, and the kind of love that endures even after the tide pulls back. The smell of antiseptic always reminded me of endings. Sterile, final, unforgiving. I was sitting in the doctor's waiting room that Tuesday afternoon, flipping through a wrinkled magazine I wasn't reading, when my phone buzzed. It was Claire, my only daughter, my reason for breathing for 68 years. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, already smiling, but her voice wasn't warm. It was thin, cold, mechanical. "Mom, we're leaving tomorrow," she said flatly. "Ryan and I are flying to Europe for at least 6 months." "Oh," I whispered, startled. "That's sudden." "Yeah, we needed funds for the move," she added, her tone clipped. "So I sold your beach house and your car this morning. The money's already transferred." For a moment, I couldn't even find words. The hum of the waiting room dissolved into silence. My beach house?" I finally stammered. "Claire, that house. Your father." "I know, Mom, but we needed the money. It was sitting there empty. You never go anymore." She exhaled sharply. "Anyway, it's done. We'll talk when we're settled. Love you. Bye." The line went dead. Just like that. 45 years of motherhood reduced to a 2-minute phone call. I sat there, phone in hand, staring at the doctor's posters. Calcium levels, heart disease, smiling seniors holding hands, all meaningless noise. I didn't cry. Not this time. Because something inside me shifted. Not anger, not grief. Something calmer, something sharper. It was almost relief. Because my dear daughter didn't know everything. My name is Margaret Hale, and until that afternoon, I thought I knew my daughter. When Thomas died 6 months ago, I thought the world had ended. He collapsed in the middle of breakfast. Coffee, toast, the crossword. His last words were, "It's a perfect morning, isn't it, Maggie?" Then his coffee cup slipped from his hand, and just like that, my perfect morning became permanent winter. Since then, Claire had been present in that polite, perfunctory way children are when guilt replaces love. She came by 3 times a week, always smelling faintly of expensive perfume and impatience. "Mom, you really should get checked up," she'd say. "You're not as young as you used to be." Then she'd help herself to coffee, glance at her phone, and leave before the kettle cooled. Still, I told myself it was love, that maybe the coldness was just her way of coping. But after today, I knew better. That beach house she sold so casually, it wasn't just a house. It was where Thomas and I spent every summer since our wedding, repairing old shutters, watching sunsets, hosting Claire's birthdays. Every wall carried our laughter, our marriage, our story. Thomas had drawn the blueprints himself. He'd built the porch railing with his hands, and the old blue Ford truck she'd also sold, that was Thomas's pride. Washed every Sunday, engine purring like an old friend. The leather seat still smelled faintly of his cologne. I sat alone on that cold green plastic chair, listening to the nurse call names one by one, and realized I was no longer the grieving widow I'd been. I was something else now. Something awake. "Mrs. Hale?" the nurse finally called. Inside, the doctor smiled with polite boredom. "Blood pressure's fine. Heart rate is good for your age. Just take it easy, okay?" I nodded automatically, my mind miles away, 3 miles to be exact, at home, in my dresser drawer. Because suddenly I remembered something Thomas had told me 3 days before he died. He'd been standing at the sink, rinsing his coffee mug. He'd turned to me and said, "Maggie, if something ever happens to me, there's an envelope in your top dresser drawer. Don't open it right away. Open it when you feel ready." I never did. After the funeral, grief turned everything foggy. The envelope was just another thing I couldn't face. Until now. I left the clinic and walked to the bus stop. My car, was apparently gone. The air smelled of salt and autumn. The streetlights were blinking on, one by one, soft gold halos over empty sidewalks. I sat on the bench, feeling oddly calm. Claire thought she had taken everything from me. The house, the car, the comfort. But she'd forgotten one thing. Thomas Hale never left anything to chance. The bus arrived. I sat by the window, watching the town roll past. The bakery, where Thomas bought me strawberry scones every Sunday, the bookstore with faded paperbacks in the window, the row of weathered cottages that faced the sea, everyone rushing home, clutching grocery bags, holding on to something that mattered. And there I was, holding on to something far more powerful, knowledge. When I got home, the house was dim and quiet, that heavy evening silence that only widows know. I walked straight to the bedroom, opened the top drawer of the oak dresser, and there it was, a manila envelope slightly yellowed, my name written in Thomas's neat, architect's hand. "Maggie, open when ready." My fingers trembled as I touched it. The weight told me there were papers inside. Maybe insurance documents, maybe memories, maybe more. Outside, a foghorn moaned faintly from the harbor, and the air smelled of rain. I sat on the edge of our bed, and slid a finger under the flap. Inside was a small stack of documents and a letter, folded in half. I hesitated, heart hammering, and then I began to read. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've been too brave for too long. I couldn't bear to burden you with worries while I lived, but now you must know everything. For years, I invested quietly. Property, stocks, shares. The Hale name owns more than you imagine. The beach house, yes, but also the building Claire lives in, and several others under a company name you won't recognize. That company belongs to you. Our daughter loves appearances. I wanted her to love people instead. If she knew our real worth, she'd stop seeing the difference between care and convenience. That's why I hid it, so that when truth came, it would test her heart first. You are wealthier than you think, my love. But more than that, you are free. Use this wisely. Forever yours, Thomas." The letter trembled in my hands. Tears came, slow, silent, unashamed. Thomas had been a bus driver of modest pay, yet behind his calm eyes, he'd built an empire of quiet preparation. Every sacrifice, every saved dollar multiplied. I looked through the deeds and papers, property titles, business shares, account statements, with figures I couldn't process, and beneath all that wealth, one line burned brightest. Use this wisely. I folded the letter back carefully. Claire thought she'd sold my last piece of peace. She had no idea she'd only triggered something far greater. That night, I slept without tears, for the first time in months, because I had a plan, and she had no idea who she was dealing with. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains like liquid gold. For the first time in months, I woke up before the alarm. The ache in my chest was still there, but softer. No longer the sharp wound of loss. It was the purpose now. I made coffee in Thomas's old French press, the one with a dented handle and his initials scratched at the bottom. The aroma filled the kitchen, wrapping me in memory. But today, I didn't linger in it. Today wasn't about remembering. It was for the beginning. The manila envelope lay open on the table, its contents neatly spread out like a quiet revolution. Property deeds, bank statements, a letter signed by my late husband, the architect who'd built houses for strangers but, it turned out, had built an empire for me. For 6 months I'd been living in ignorance, thinking I was surviving on widow's pension and habit. In reality, I'd been sitting on power. And now that power had a purpose. I poured myself another cup of coffee and dialed the number written on the corner of one of Thomas's papers. Mr. Keller. His name had been scrawled beside a firm's letterhead, Keller and Associates, Estate Law. The line clicked after 2 rings. "Good morning, Keller and Associates." A male voice, calm, precise. "Mr. Keller, please. This is Margaret Hale." A brief pause. Then a voice I remembered from the funeral, measured, respectful. "Mrs. Hale, of course. I wondered when I'd hear from you. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," I said, "but I came across some papers of my husband's. I believe I'll need your help understanding them." "Of course. When would you like to come in?" "As soon as possible." "Tomorrow morning?" "No," I said, glancing at the envelope again. "Today." Downtown Maine was waking up slowly. Coffee carts hissing steam, gulls circling the harbor, sunlight bouncing off wet cobblestones. I hadn't driven since Thomas died. Now, thanks to Claire's impulsive sale, I couldn't even if I wanted to. So I walked. 3 blocks to the bus stop, 15 minutes of rocking motion, then a short climb up a narrow hill where the firm's office stood, a white brick building with ivy crawling up its side. Mr. Keller was waiting in the lobby, mid-50s, silver hair, kind eyes behind thin glasses. He shook my hand firmly. "Mrs. Hale, you have Thomas's composure." "He planned for everything," I said softly. "Even this meeting, I suspect." He nodded toward his office. "Let's have a look at what he left you." The office smelled of paper and cedar polish. Sunlight streamed through tall windows onto a mahogany desk already prepared with a yellow legal pad and 2 pens. I handed him the envelope and sat opposite. He took his time reading, turning pages carefully, murmuring under his breath. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed. "This is, quite substantial, Mrs. Hale." I folded my hands. "How substantial?" He adjusted his glasses. "Your husband wasn't exaggerating. The company he mentions, Hale Coastal Holdings, is real. According to these documents, it owns 7 properties across the state. One of them is your daughter's apartment building. There are also shares in 3 construction firms and 2 trust accounts. Everything is legally under your name now." I stared at him. "Under my name?" He nodded. "You're the sole shareholder and beneficiary." Thomas was clever. He hid ownership through a shell company, likely to avoid family disputes. If you wish, I can begin the process of transferring all holdings directly to you. A warmth spread through my chest, part disbelief, part pride, part sorrow. Thomas, always one step ahead. "Can you also check the sale of our beach house?" I asked. Mr. Keller frowned. "Sold recently." "Yes, by my daughter, apparently, without my consent." He flipped through the deeds. "Then she had no right to do that. The property is registered solely under your name. We can have the transaction nullified immediately." I hesitated. "I don't want it public. Not yet." "Meaning?" "I want the reversal handled quietly. The buyers can have their money back, but no one, not even Claire, should know I'm behind it." He studied me for a moment, then smiled slightly. "You sound just like Thomas. Strategic, not vengeful." "I'm done crying," I said simply. "Now I'm planning." For the next hour, he explained things I barely understood. Escrow accounts, property liens, inheritance transfers. I nodded, taking it all in, though half my mind wandered elsewhere. Claire's voice, Ryan's laughter, the sound of luggage wheels scraping the driveway. They thought they'd erased me. When Mr. Keller finished, he said gently, "Mrs. Hale, you could pursue criminal charges for fraud." "No." "Are you sure?" "It would be an easy case." "I'm sure," I said. I'm not looking for punishment. I'm looking for education." He tilted his head. "Education?" "My daughter believes she understands the cost of things. I'd like her to learn their value instead." For a moment, he just looked at me, the quiet smile of a man who'd seen many kinds of justice, but not this one. "As you wish, Mrs. Hale. We'll start with the beach house and the corporate transition. I'll handle it personally." "Discreetly," I reminded him. He nodded. "You have my word." When I stepped back into the street, the air smelled like ocean salt and spring thaw. The gulls screamed overhead as though mocking the city's rush. People passed me, businessmen, students, mothers pushing strollers, and I realized how invisible I must look, a gray-haired widow in a long coat clutching her purse too tightly. No one would ever guess that. Hidden behind the calm face of an old woman, an entire empire had just changed hands. It almost made me smile. I stopped at a bakery and ordered Thomas's favorite scone, cranberry and almond. The clerk smiled when I told her to keep the change. Thomas would have laughed at that. He always said I saved every penny like it might sprout interest overnight. If only he could see me now. That afternoon, I sat by the window with the documents spread across the table once again. The sunlight fell on the top sheet. Hale Coastal Holdings, ownership transfer, pending. Pending, such a simple word, but it carried promise. A new life quietly forming beneath the ashes of the old one. I thought about calling Claire, just to hear her voice, to ask where she was, what she planned, how Europe was treating her. But I didn't. She'd made her choices, and I was finally making mine. Instead, I picked up my notebook, the same one I used to grade essays when I still taught literature, and wrote a list, my handwriting still neat and disciplined. Contact Keller about reversal of sale, secure deeds, review bank accounts, reclaim the truck, stay invisible, stay invisible. That line mattered most. If Claire thought I was weak, let her. If Ryan thought I was naive, let him. The best lessons are learned in silence. As the evening grew colder, I lit the fireplace. The flicker of orange against the fading daylight made the room feel alive again. The house was quiet except for the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Thomas's photograph stood on the mantel, him in his work jacket grinning with that boyish half-smile. "I found your letter, Tom," I whispered. The fire popped, almost in reply. "You were right, as usual." I smiled faintly. "She'll learn, love. I promise you, she'll learn." I leaned back in the old armchair, listening to the crackle. And that's when the phone rang. It was Mrs. Grant, my neighbor. "Margaret, dear, have you heard the news?" I frowned. "What news?" "Oh, just gossip, I suppose. But I heard your daughter and her husband sold that pretty beach house of yours. Such a shame. And now apparently they're off to France. I hope they'll be all right. I can't imagine traveling with all those debts hanging over their heads." "Debts?" I asked quietly. "That's what they say. Ryan's business hasn't been doing well. Something about investors pulling out." My lips curved, not into a smile, but something smaller, colder. "Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Grant. That's very helpful. Are you all right, dear?" "I'm fine," I said softly, for the first time in a while. After I hung up, I stared into the fire until the embers glowed low and red. Every story has its turning point. Mine had just arrived. If Ryan's empire was crumbling, it meant only one thing. Their adventure would collapse before it began. And when it did, I'd be waiting. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with a lesson written in ink and patience. The kind Thomas would have admired. I opened my notebook again and added one more line beneath "Stay invisible." Prepare for their return. I closed it carefully. Outside, the tide was rolling in, relentless and steady. The house creaked with the familiar rhythm of old wood and sea wind, and somewhere far across the ocean, my daughter believed she'd left me behind. But she was wrong, because the only thing more dangerous than a woman betrayed is a woman who's learned to wait. The following week, began with rain. Not the loud, dramatic kind, just the thin, steady drizzle that paints the coast in silver. It was the sort of weather Thomas loved. He used to call it the world's way of rinsing its mistakes. By Thursday morning, the phone rang again. Mrs. Hale, Mr. Keller's voice came, smooth and measured. I have good news. The sale of your beach house has been nullified. The buyers were cooperative once they realized it was a fraudulent transaction. You are, once again, the sole owner. I closed my eyes, breathing in the quiet satisfaction. Thank you, Mr. Keller. Please keep everything off record. I don't want my daughter to know. Not yet. Of course. I've handled it under the holding company's name. No trace will lead back to you. You're very thorough. Your husband trained me well. The line clicked off, and for a long moment I stood there listening to the rain against the windows. Then I smiled. The beach house was mine again. Not for revenge, not even for nostalgia, but because it was the one place that still smelled like Thomas. Salt air, cedar wood, and the faint trace of his shaving soap. 2 days later, I took the early bus to the coast. The road curved through pine forests still wet from the morning drizzle. Mist hung low over the fields, curling around telephone poles like ghosts reluctant to leave. When the bus finally rolled into Harbor Point, I stepped off into air so heavy with salt it clung to my coat. The ocean stretched out gray and endless beyond the dunes. The house stood at the end of Shoreline Drive, cream-colored paint faded to ivory, porch railings wrapped in seaweed ribbon from the last storm. It looked smaller than I remembered. Houses always do when the laughter has gone out of them. A moving truck idled at the curb. 2 men were loading boxes. One of them turned, wiping rain from his forehead. "Afternoon, ma'am. You hear about the sale?" "Something like that," I said. "Has ownership been settled?" He nodded. "All cleared this morning. Funny story. The paperwork bounced back, money refunded. Guess the lady who sold it didn't really own it." I almost pitied Claire for the humiliation waiting on the other side of that discovery. Almost. "Do you know who's taking the house now?" he asked. "I hear it's going back to the original owner." He smiled politely. "Good for her. It's a fine place." "Yes," I murmured. "It is." When they drove away, I walked up the porch steps and pulled the brass key from my pocket. The same key Thomas had pressed into my hand 30 years ago after finishing the porch railings himself. It still fits perfectly. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and sea damp. The furniture was as we'd left it. Wicker chairs by the window, the old map of Maine framed above the mantel, Thomas's fishing rod propped in the corner. Dust drifted in the slant of light from the front windows. I ran my hand along the banister, felt the groove where Claire had carved her initials when she was 15. For a moment, the years collapsed. The sound of her laughter, the clatter of Thomas frying fish in the kitchen, the creak of the porch swing at night. Everything still lived, here, waiting. I sank into the armchair and let the sea wind blow through the open door. After an hour, I took out my notebook. "Step 1, completed," I wrote. The house recovered. Then, beneath it, next, truck. I called Mr. Keller from the landline. "Mrs. Hale," he answered. "I was about to call you. I traced the Ford pickup. Your daughter sold it through a small dealer in Brunswick. It's registered under a local collector's name." "Can it be reclaimed?" He hesitated. "Legally, yes. But she had a limited power of attorney you signed after your husband's passing. We'll need to prove it was obtained under misrepresentation." I sighed. "She brought me papers while I was still broken. I didn't even read them." "That helps our case," he said gently. "I'll handle the process. Give me a week." "Thank you, Mr. Keller." When I hung up, I walked onto the porch. The tide was creeping in, waves breaking softly against the rocks. Rain had stopped, leaving the air tasting like iron and salt. I whispered to the wind, "One step at a time, Tom. One step at a time." Back in town, the gossip machine was turning. That evening, Mrs. Grant appeared at my door holding a covered dish. I made chowder, she said, brushing rain off her umbrella. Thought you might like some company. You read my mind, I said, letting her in. She set the dish on the stove and lowered her voice. Margaret, everyone's talking about your daughter. Word is, Ryan's company collapsed. Some say he took investor money and vanished. They're calling it a scandal. I stirred the chowder slowly. Where did you hear that? My niece works at the bank. Apparently, their joint accounts are frozen. Claire's credit cards declined in Paris. I didn't let my face move. That's unfortunate. Mrs. Grant sighed. She must be devastated, poor girl. Still, after selling your house like that, well, karma travels faster than airplanes. I smiled faintly. You've always had a way with words, Doris. You'd better believe I do. She handed me a spoon. Taste this before it gets cold. As we ate, she chattered about her garden, the church fundraiser, the leaky roof on the school gym. I listened, grateful for the normal noise of her kindness. But underneath her words, a quieter realization pulsed. The universe had begun its own correction. That night, I wrote again in my notebook, "The storm has started. Do nothing. Wait." And beneath that, "Forgiveness can wait, too." A week later, Mr. Keller called. "The pickup's on its way back to you," he said. "The buyer agreed to return it once we explained the situation. It'll be delivered to your driveway tomorrow morning." I thanked him, then asked, "And the other matters?" "We've completed the property transfers. You now have full control of the holdings. The company accounts are active." I hung up slowly. The sound of rain returned outside, as if punctuating the words. Everything was back in my hands, quietly, legally, perfectly. But this wasn't a victory, it was set up. Because victory, I was learning, wasn't about reclaiming what was taken. It was about what you do once you have it back. The next morning, the truck arrived. Old blue paint glistening with drizzle. Chrome mirrors shining like they had that first summer Thomas brought it home. The delivery man handed me the keys. "She runs like a dream," he said. I smiled. She always did. When he drove away, I climbed inside. The leather seats creaked under my weight, familiar and comforting. Thomas's scent still lingered faintly, motor oil and cedar aftershave. I started the engine. The growl filled the driveway like a heartbeat, and for the first time since his death, I felt alive. Later that day, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "Mom, please read." It was from Claire. "Hi, Mom. I know you're angry. I deserve it. Things didn't go as planned. Ryan's business fell apart and he's stuck in Europe trying to fix things. I'll call soon. Just please don't worry. I'll make it up to you." I stared at the words for a long time. There was no apology, not really. Just the tone of someone trying to keep the illusion of control. I closed the laptop without replying. Not yet. Patience, Margaret. Let the lesson ripen. That evening, I drove the truck to the coast again. The sky had cleared, the ocean glowed copper under the setting sun. I parked by the waterline and watched the waves swallow the light. Behind me, the beach house stood steady, windows catching the last fire of the day. For a moment, I imagined Thomas beside me, arm resting on the open window. "She's losing everything, Tom," I whispered. And then, softly, "Good. Maybe she'll find herself instead." The horizon blurred into night, and the tide came in, erasing every footprint from the sand. I started the engine again, heading home. The road shimmered in the dusk, slick with rain and promise. In the distance, thunder murmured, too far to be a threat, close enough to be warning. Storms, I thought, have their own timing, and some lessons need thunder before they clear the air. The wind had changed. You could feel it even through closed windows. The sea pressing closer, restless against the cliffs. By the second week of June, Harbor Point was buzzing. You didn't need to buy a newspaper. The town itself carried news faster than print. When I stepped into the bakery that morning, conversations hushed just a little too quickly. Mrs. Grant was at the counter. She turned, pastry bag in hand. "Oh, Margaret, did you hear?" I smiled faintly. I usually do eventually. "It's your Claire," she said in a whisper that wasn't a whisper at all. "Word is she's back in the States. Her husband stayed behind to resolve things. They say there are investigations." I pretended to study the bread display. "What kind of investigations?" "Financial," she said, voice dropping now for real. "Investor fraud, mismanaged funds, tax evasion, terrible mess. The papers don't use his name yet, but everyone knows. And poor Claire, she's stuck with frozen accounts and nothing to her name." "Poor Claire," I echoed softly, and the words felt strange in my mouth. Not cruel, not kind, just true. Mrs. Grant sighed. "It's awful. But maybe it'll make her rethink some choices. You raised her well. She just lost her way." I nodded. Sometimes the road back is longer than we expect. When I returned home, the answering machine light was blinking. 3 messages, one from the pharmacy, one from Mr. Keller, and one from an overseas number. I saved the first 2 and let the third play last. "Mom, it's me. I'm sorry it's taken this long. Things are bad. He's not the man I thought he was. I'm coming home for a while. Please don't hang up when I call again." The message ended with a static sigh, like the ocean drawing breath. For a moment, I just stood there. There it was. The sound of her voice again, familiar and foreign all at once. A mix of pride and panic, guilt and fear. It didn't stir anger in me anymore, just a deep, heavy ache, the kind that comes after the storm when the world is too quiet. Later that afternoon, I called Mr. Keller. He picked up immediately. "Mrs. Hale, I was about to reach out. The investigation into Mr. Benson has escalated. Multiple investors have come forward and the firm is under audit. I understand your daughter returned last night." "Yes," I said quietly. "She may be contacted as a witness, perhaps even complicit depending on how the funds were moved. I recommend keeping communication minimal until we know more." "I don't plan to interfere," I said, "but I'd like to help her. Eventually." He paused. "That's kind of you. Most wouldn't." "She's still my daughter," I replied, "and lessons mean nothing if you don't give people a chance to learn from them." He hesitated, then said, "Your husband was right about you." "Thomas was wrong about one thing," I said softly. "He thought I'd never be capable of cold decisions. Turns out grief teaches precision." That evening I drove to the beach house. The sky was lavender gray, waves gnawing gently at the shore. I opened all the windows, letting salt air fill every corner. For weeks I'd been thinking about what to do with the place. It wasn't just property anymore, it was memory. And memory, if left to rot, turns poisonous. So I started cleaning. I pulled sheets off furniture, swept the floors, and scrubbed the salt film from the windows until the sunset burned clear through. It felt like preparing for something. Or someone. When I finished, I walked out onto the porch. The tide was high, foamy fingers licking at the rocks. I imagined Claire standing here again, 15 and laughing, begging Thomas to let her drive the truck to town. That child was still somewhere inside the woman now fighting to stay afloat. "Maybe this house can still save her," I whispered. The next morning, Harbor Point hummed with another rumor. Claire Benson had been seen at the airport, alone, exhausted, dragging 2 suitcases that looked too heavy for her small frame. By afternoon, Mrs. Grant confirmed it with a phone call. "Margaret, dear, she's here. She rented a room at the Harbor Inn. Looks like she hasn't slept in days." I thanked her and hung up without comment. Then I stood at the window, staring at the rain that had returned like an old friend. Part of me wanted to run to her, to open the door and say, "I told you so," then pull her into my arms anyway. But another part, the part Thomas would have recognized, knew it wasn't time yet. She needed to reach for me first. 2 days passed. I kept to my chores, pretending not to wait for the inevitable. Then, just after dusk on Sunday, the phone rang again. "Mom?" Her voice was brittle, like glass about to give way. I closed my eyes. "Hello, Claire." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear her breathing. "I didn't know where else to go," she said finally. "I can't stay at the inn much longer. I don't have money, not even for food." "Where's Ryan?" "Gone. He left after the interviews with investigators. I don't even know what's true anymore." I kept my voice steady. "You're safe now. That's what matters." "I'm not safe, Mom. Her voice broke. "I'm scared. I don't know what to do." For the first time in months, tears pressed at the back of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. "Come home," I said simply. There was a pause. "Home? The house?" "Yes," I said. "The one by the sea." When I hung up, I sat in silence. The rain tapped against the window pane in steady rhythm, like the world marking time for what was coming next. The game board was changing. The prodigal child was on her way back, not for forgiveness yet, but for survival. And I was no longer the mother she remembered. I walked to the mantel, touched Thomas's photograph. "Tomorrow she'll be here," I said quietly. "You always said love and lessons should walk hand in hand. Let's see if that's still true." Outside, the sea roared louder. A storm warning crackled faintly on the radio. Appropriate, I thought. Storms have always been our family's way of cleansing the air. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt too alive. The wind clawing at shutters, the clock ticking too loud, the ache of memory pacing the hallways. At one point, I stood by the window, watching lightning ripple far out over the water. For a second, it lit up everything. The shoreline, the wet sand, the truck parked below. Then darkness swallowed it again. That's when I understood what this next chapter would be. Not revenge, not redemption, reckoning. Not to destroy her, but to rebuild what she'd tried to sell away. And when the clock struck midnight, I whispered into the quiet, "She's coming home, Tom. Let's make sure she finds what she lost." The rain began before dawn. Thin, cold, steady, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes every thought feel heavier. I was making tea when I saw the headlights cutting through the fog outside. The truck tires crunched against the gravel, paused, then went still. For a moment, I didn't move. I just stood there, fingers resting on the handle of the kettle, listening to the slow tick of the kitchen clock. Then came the knock, not loud, just two uncertain taps. When I opened the door, Claire stood there in the gray light, hair plastered to her face, eyes hollow and red-rimmed. Her coat was soaked through. She clutched one suitcase, its wheels caked with mud. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. The words were so small, they almost vanished in the sound of the wind. "Come in before you drown," I said. She stepped inside, dripping on the mat. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. I could see the traces of the girl she'd once been beneath all that exhaustion. The tilt of her chin, the tiny scar above her eyebrow from when she'd fallen off her bike. She wasn't my enemy. She was just lost. "Tea?" I asked. She nodded wordlessly. I poured her a cup and slid it across the table. Her hands trembled as she lifted it. For a while, neither of us spoke. When she finally did, her voice cracked. "I didn't know where else to go." "You came here," I said simply. "That's something." Her eyes filled instantly. "You should hate me." I set my cup down carefully. "Hate's a heavy thing to carry at my age. I travel lighter now." She gave a weak laugh that turned into a sob. She slept most of that day. I made soup, left it by her bedside, and went about my chores as if nothing extraordinary had happened. By evening, she came into the living room, wrapped in an old quilt from the closet. The storm outside had softened into a steady drizzle. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" I asked, not looking up from the book I was pretending to read. She hesitated. "Ryan." Everything was a lie. The business trip, the investors, the apartment we rented in Paris. It was all borrowed money. He said he needed my signature for routine documents, but I didn't realize I was co-signing loans. "Your name's on the papers?" She nodded. "And the accounts are frozen. I have nothing, Mom. Not a cent. Her voice cracked again. They questioned me at the airport like I was a criminal. You're not, I said softly. Maybe I am. She whispered. I helped him. I smiled at his meetings, shook hands with people he was scamming. I played the perfect wife while he stole from everyone around us. That doesn't make you guilty, I said, though we both knew guilt wasn't just about law. It was about conscience. She stared into the fire, silent for a long while. Then, I sold your house. I know. Her head snapped up. You know? I read the papers, Claire. You signed my name. It wasn't hard to find. She flinched. Mom, I raised a hand. I'm not interested in excuses. I just want the truth. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I thought I was saving us. Ryan said he could triple the money. He said you didn't need the beach house anymore, that you'd be better off with something smaller. I believed him. And now? She swallowed hard. Now I'd give anything to take it back. I leaned back in my chair. You can't undo what's done, Claire, but you can decide what comes next. She looked at me, desperate. What do I do? I studied her for a long moment before speaking. You start over. Here. But not as a guest. She blinked. What do you mean? You'll earn your keep. The house needs work, repairs, cleaning, painting. You'll handle that. There's a diner in town that could use help. I'll make a few calls. Her expression flickered between relief and disbelief. You're letting me stay? I'm letting you rebuild, I said. There's a difference. That night, after she went to bed, I sat by the fire alone. Every instinct in me screamed to protect her, to call Mr. Keller, to wire money, to fix it all before dawn. But I didn't. Instead, I stared at the flames and thought of Thomas, how he'd always believed that love without accountability was just indulgence. He was right. If I rescued her now, she'd never learn to rescue herself. Days passed. Claire stayed mostly quiet, helping where she could. She repaired the broken porch rail, scrubbed windows, and spent long hours walking the shoreline alone. At night, I'd hear her crying softly through the thin walls. I never went in. One morning, I found her standing by the truck, running her fingers along the faded paint. Dad used to drive this every Sunday, she said quietly. Yes, he loved that thing more than he loved the priest's sermons. She smiled faintly. I remember. He'd say the sea runs better when you listen to it. It's true, I said. Everything listens if you stay quiet long enough. She looked at me then, eyes tired but clear. I've been quiet for a long time, Mom. The only thing I hear now is regret. Regret's a teacher too, I told her, just not a gentle one. That evening we had dinner together for the first time in months. Claire had cooked. Pasta, simple, a little over-salted. She was nervous. I could tell by the way she kept rearranging the silverware. I found a part-time job at the diner, she said suddenly, washing dishes. Hard work, I said. I know. I want to do something real, something honest. I nodded. Then you're on the right path. We ate in silence for a while. The fire crackled softly in the next room. Then she said, almost in a whisper, I don't deserve this, your kindness, this roof, not after what I did. You don't, I said plainly. She froze. I let the silence stretch until she looked up. But deserving isn't the point, I said. It's about what you'll do with it now. Her eyes shimmered with tears she didn't let fall. I'll earn it, Mom. I swear. I reached across the table, covered her hand with mine. Good, because forgiveness isn't a gift, Claire, it's a contract. That night, after she went to bed, I opened Thomas's old chest in the hallway. Inside were the documents, the same papers my husband had left for me before his death, the deeds, the accounts, the proof that every property, including the beach house, still belonged to me. I ran my fingers over the folder and smiled faintly. She had no idea, not yet, and she wasn't ready to know, because this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about rebuilding her soul. brick by brick, the way Thomas had built our porch. And when she was strong enough, when she truly understood what she'd lost, then I'd tell her the truth. The next morning, Claire came into the kitchen early, hair tied back, smelling of soap and coffee. "Mom," she said, hesitating, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." She looked down. "Why aren't you angry anymore?" I studied her face. The exhaustion, the guilt, the small spark of hope she was trying to hide. "Because anger is for people who still expect something," I said. "I don't expect anymore. I just watched." "Watch what?" "To see if you'll become the woman I always hoped you'd be." She nodded slowly, tears glistening but unshed. "Then I'll try, Mom. I really will." "I know you will," I said quietly. As she walked out to start her day, sunlight broke through the gray sky for the first time in weeks, and for the first time, I believed her. Mornings began to sound different. The kettle's whistle no longer echoed in an empty house. It blended with the quiet shuffle of another pair of footsteps. Claire had started waking up early, long before sunrise. I'd hear the back door click, the faint creak of the porch steps, and then silence, her footsteps dissolving into sand. She walked the beach alone every morning. It was the same route Thomas used to take when life felt too heavy. He'd said the ocean was a mirror. It didn't lie. It only showed you what you brought to it. Maybe that's what Claire was looking for, her reflection in the wreckage. She came back each morning with seaweed in her hair and damp cuffs, then sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. "What are you writing?" I asked once. She shrugged. "Lists, mostly. Things I need to fix, things I want to remember." "Like what?" She glanced down at the page, embarrassed. "Little things. Be kind before you're right. Don't spend what you don't have. Call your mother before you regret it." I smiled behind my teacup. "That's a good list." She smiled faintly back. "It's not finished yet." The diner called her most afternoons. She'd come home smelling of coffee, dish soap, and exhaustion, but her steps had steadied. At night, I'd watch her in the lamplight, folding napkins for the next day, murmuring to herself the way she used to rehearse school speeches as a girl. Once, I heard her laugh softly at something on the radio. It startled me, that sound. It had been so long since laughter belonged in this house. A week later, Mr. Keller called. "Mrs. Hale, the transfer went through. You now have complete control of your properties again, including the beach house and the downtown building." "Good," I said. "And the sale?" "Officially annulled. The buyers were refunded without ever knowing who intervened." "Perfect. Keep my name out of everything until I say otherwise." He hesitated. "And your daughter?" "She's working," I said simply. "Let her." "You're a rare kind of woman, Mrs. Hale." "No," I said, "just one who learned patience the hard way." That evening, I drove into town to check the building. The tenants had no idea I owned it. They waved when I passed, offered small talk about the weather, about how repairs had suddenly begun in the lobby. When I stepped inside, the new paint smell hit me like a memory. This was the place where Claire and Ryan had lived, the place they'd thought was theirs. I walked past their old door. It was open. Cleaners were inside. The furniture was gone. The walls were bare. Only a faint square of brighter paint showed where a photo frame had hung. A family portrait, probably. A lie frozen in time. I stood there for a while, looking at that empty space. Then I whispered, "It's over," and left the key with the superintendent. The sound of it clinking onto the desk was oddly satisfying, like punctuation on a sentence that had taken too long to end. Back at the house, Claire was scrubbing the kitchen floor. When she saw me, she sat up quickly. "You didn't tell me you were going out." "I had errands," I said. "Anything important?" "Just life." She studied me, suspicious but respectful now. That was new. This careful restraint, this awareness of boundaries she never used to see. "Dinner's almost ready," she said. I nodded. "Smells good." "It's just stew." "Then it's perfect." After dinner, we sat on the porch. The sea was calm again, the moon silvering the water like spilled paint. Claire hugged her knees, staring out. You ever feel like the world's giving you a second chance, but you're too afraid to take it? All the time, I said. What did you do? I took it anyway. She smiled barely. You make everything sound so simple. It's not simple, I said. It's just necessary. She nodded slowly, then said, Mom, can I ask you something personal? Depends on the question. Why didn't you ever remarry after Dad died? I looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't asking out of curiosity. She was trying to understand the kind of strength she didn't yet believe she had. Because no one could fill a space that wasn't empty, I said. Your father didn't leave a hole. He left roots. Her eyes softened. You still miss him. Every day, I said. But missing someone doesn't mean you stop living. I think I stopped living a while ago, she whispered. Then start again. The next few weeks blurred into routine. Work, chores, quiet dinners, the hum of an old radio. Every once in a while, Claire's phone would buzz. Unknown numbers, creditors, or maybe reporters sniffing around the scandal. She never answered. One evening, I found her staring at the screen, thumb hovering over the reject button. Still afraid of ghosts? I asked. More like consequences, she said softly. Every time that phone rings, I feel like the past is calling to drag me back. I took the phone, turned it face down, then stopped looking at it. The past can only haunt you if you keep leaving the door open. 3 nights later, she came home later than usual. I was reading when she appeared in the doorway, hands trembling. Mom, someone recognized me at the diner, she said, voice shaking. They called me the fraud's wife. I set my book down slowly. Did you say anything? No, I just kept working. But it broke something inside me. I stood up, crossed to her, and placed a hand on her shoulder. Good, I said softly. Let it break. That's how light gets in. She looked at me, confused, angry, tearful all at once. You sound like you've rehearsed all this. Maybe I have, I said. And in a way, I had. For months, maybe years. I had rehearsed every possible version of this conversation. The humiliation, the reckoning, the release. Now it was happening. And it was working. By mid-October, something in her changed. She stopped crying after work. She started bringing home leftovers for the neighbors. She even helped Aurora, the widow down the street, fix her leaking roof. One morning, I found a note on the fridge in her handwriting. Gone to help Mrs. Graham paint her shop. Don't wait for lunch. See, I smiled. The daughter who once sold her mother's home now volunteered to repair another woman's walls. That's what transformation looks like. Slow, invisible, undeniable. 2 weeks later, Mr. Keller visited. He stood in the doorway with a briefcase and that careful lawyer's expression. Everything's in order, Mrs. Hale. All assets secured. The estate stronger than ever. I nodded. Thank you, Mr. Keller. Quietly, as always. He glanced toward the living room where Claire was setting the table. She still doesn't know? No, I said. And she won't. Not yet. He hesitated. You do realize, legally, she's entitled to part of it. Legally, yes, I said. Morally, she has to earn it. He studied me for a long moment. You know, if I didn't know better, I'd think you were writing a novel, not living one. I smiled faintly. Every mother's life is a story, Mr. Keller. Some of us just write in silence. That night, after he left, Claire joined me on the porch. The tide was out, the stars were sharp and cold. Mom, she said, voice calm, I want to pay you rent. Rent? I'm working now. I can't live here for free. I stared at her for a long moment. All right, I said finally, but only if you choose the amount. She thought for a while. $100 a month? That's fair. She smiled, small, genuine. It feels good to say that, to owe something honest. I nodded. Debt isn't the problem, Claire. Forgetting what it costs, That's the problem. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I heard her moving around, organizing, writing, humming softly. I closed my eyes and listened. There was peace in the sound of her rebuilding, but deep down, I knew the story wasn't finished yet. The truth still waited like a shadow under the door. And when it came into the light, it would either break us apart again or bind us forever. The day everything changed didn't start with thunder. It started with sunlight, calm, golden, and misleading. Claire was humming in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, making pancakes that looked more like burnt clouds. I was sorting through old mail at the dining table, envelopes stacked high, some unopened for months. Most were the usual: bills, circulars, charity requests. But one was different. Plain white, embossed seal in the corner, Keller and Associates. Claire wiped her hands and looked over my shoulder. Is that from Mr. Keller? The lawyer you used when Dad passed? Yes, I said quickly, sliding it under the rest. Routine papers. But she'd already noticed the heading. Property transfer confirmation. Her smile faltered. Property transfer? I forced a calm tone. Just old business, honey. Eat your breakfast. She hesitated, then went back to flipping pancakes, though I could feel her glance flicking toward me, curious, uneasy. I waited until she left for work before opening the envelope. Inside were the finalized documents Mr. Keller had promised. Titles, deeds, account statements, the beach house, the downtown apartments, the stocks I never told her about, all of it under my name. I slipped them into the drawer with the others, tucked beneath a pile of kitchen towels. My secret fortress of paper and silence. When I closed the drawer, I caught my reflection in the window. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. The calm, deliberate architect of her daughter's downfall and rebirth. Was this still love? Or something colder wearing a love's mask? That evening, Claire came home early. She looked different, restless, distracted, the kind of expression that means a person has followed a thought too far and can't turn back. Mom, she said carefully, can we talk? Of course. She sat across from me, hands clasped too tightly. I went to the post office today. You had a few letters there and I signed for them. I looked up slowly. And? One of them was from a title office. The silence stretched. Mom, they had your name listed as the current owner of the Seaview Apartments. I set my teacup down with precision. That's correct. Her mouth fell open slightly. What do you mean, that's correct? You own it. Since when? Since before you thought you did. She blinked, eyes darting between me and the window as if trying to find an escape route that didn't exist. You mean, the apartment where I lived with Ryan, that was yours? Yes. Her voice cracked. All this time? You let me think. You let me sell the beach house thinking you had nothing. She stood up, shaking. You lied to me. No, I said quietly. I simply didn't tell you. That's the same thing, she shouted. You let me drown, Mom. You let me fall apart. Do you have any idea what it was like begging strangers for a job while you sat here? What, counting your money? I didn't flinch. I was counting your lessons. She stared at me, horrified. My lessons? Yes, the ones life refused to teach you until someone forced it to. Her hands trembled. Do you even hear yourself? You sound cruel. Maybe, I said softly. But cruelty and discipline wear the same coat until you look closely. She pressed a hand to her mouth. I thought I'd lost everything. I thought I deserved it. And you just watched? I didn't just watch, I said. I worked to fix the damage quietly. Every debt, every illegal sale, every forged paper. I cleaned it up. You never saw it because you weren't ready to. She turned away, pacing. You wanted to punish me. No, I said, standing now. I wanted you to understand the value, the kind that can't be measured in dollars or apologies. She spun on me. You could have told me. And if I had, I asked, what would you have done? Packed your things again? Chased another? Smooth-talking savior? You needed to fall, Claire. You needed to feel the ground. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You sound like him. I froze. Like who? Dad, she whispered. When he used to warn me that love isn't soft, that sometimes it's supposed to hurt. I hated him for that. And now you're saying the same thing. I turned away then, because the truth in her voice struck too deep. The rain had started again outside, faint at first, then steady, drumming against the glass like the heartbeat of the past. After a long silence, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. So what now? You've proven your point. I'm humiliated, broke, working myself sick. What's next? Do you want me to thank you? No, I said. I want you to decide who you'll be from now on. She sank into a chair, staring at her hands. You think I can come back from this? I don't think, I said quietly. I know. Her eyes flicked toward me, half anger, half longing for the comfort she still wasn't ready to accept. Then she asked the question I knew had been waiting since the moment she opened that letter. Why didn't you tell me? The air between us went still. Even the rain seemed to pause, because there was no easy answer, no way to explain that sometimes silence is the only tool a mother has left. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came, only the sound of the sea outside, rising against the rocks like applause for a tragedy it had already seen 1,000 times. She stood up slowly, wiping her eyes. I need to think, she said. I need to understand what kind of mother lets her child learn through pain. And then she left, the front door closing softly behind her, the kind of quiet that hurts more than shouting. I watched her walk down the path toward the cliffs, coat pulled tight, swallowed by fog. For a moment I thought about running after her, then I stopped myself. Some journeys can't be interrupted, even by love. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the documents spread across the table. The lamp cast long shadows over every page, deeds, signatures, bank records, proof of everything I had built, everything I had hidden. I traced my name on the topmost document, then whispered into the empty room. Now she knows. The wind rattled the window panes like an answer. She'll hate me for a while, I said quietly to Thomas's photograph, but one day she'll see it for what it was, not punishment, but protection. Outside, lightning split the sky, brief, brilliant, gone. Just like truth, blinding but fleeting. 3 days, that's how long the house stayed silent. The clock ticked, the kettle hissed, the waves came and went, but no voice answered mine. Claire hadn't returned. Her suitcase was gone from the hallway. The coat she'd arrived in was missing too. Only her notebook remained on the IET kitchen table, open to a half-finished sentence. Sometimes love feels like a storm that doesn't know when to stop raining. I traced the words with my fingertip until the ink smudged. By the second night, the quiet began to feel alive, like it was watching me. Every creak in the floorboard sounded like her footsteps that never came. I told myself she needed time, that running was her way of thinking, but a small, traitorous part of me whispered another word, revenge. Had I pushed her too far? On the morning of the 4th day, Mr. Keller called. Mrs. Hale, forgive me for intruding. I thought you should know. Your daughter withdrew a small sum from the account I set up for her emergency use. My throat tightened. How much? Just $500. Enough for travel, perhaps a few nights somewhere. Do you know where she went? He hesitated. There's a bus ticket purchase on record. Destination, Red Harbor. Red Harbor, 40 miles north. The fishing town where Thomas and I had spent our honeymoon. The irony almost made me laugh. When people are lost, they circle back to the places that first taught them to love. I drove there that afternoon. The road curved along the cliffs, the sea on my left, endless and gray. Every mile felt like reopening an old wound. At Red Harbor, I parked near the pier. The wind tasted of salt and diesel. Fishermen hauled nets that glittered with trapped sunlight. And there, sitting on the edge of the dock with her knees pulled to her chest, was Claire. She didn't turn when I approached. "Thought you'd find me sooner," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure you wanted to be found." She gave a humorless laugh. "I didn't, but you always had good timing." I sat beside her. The wood was wet and cold beneath us. Seagulls cried overhead, sharper than words. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "I read all the documents, you know. Every page. You own more than I ever imagined." "I didn't hide it to hurt you." "You keep saying that," she murmured, eyes fixed on the water. "But everything hurts anyway." The tide slapped the dock posts rhythmically, like punctuation marks between our sentences. "When Dad died," she continued, "I thought I had to become the strong one, the provider, the planner. But I didn't have his wisdom, only his pride. Ryan saw that weakness in me and used it." Her voice cracked. "And when I stole from you, I told myself it was for our future. I convinced myself I was helping, but I was just running from grief." "You were blinded by someone who knew what to promise," I said softly. She looked at me then, tears spilling freely. "And what about you, Mom? What blinded you?" The question pierced deeper than she knew. "Fear," I admitted. "Fear that if I rescued you too soon, you'd never stop falling. Fear that love had made me weak." She studied my face, as if seeing me for the first time. "You wanted to save me by breaking me. I wanted to save you by showing you who you are when everything else is gone." Her lip trembled. "And what if I never came back? I trusted that you would." "Why?" "Because you're my daughter, and because the world is too small to outrun yourself." A gust of wind cut through the silence. She shivered, pulling her coat tighter. "I stayed at that old inn by the lighthouse," she said. "The woman who runs it, Mrs. Lynn, recognized me from the papers. She didn't ask questions. She just gave me soup and said, 'Sometimes daughters need to leave their mothers to learn how to return.'" I smiled faintly. Wise woman. She told me something else. Claire turned toward me, eyes red but steady. She said, "When love teaches through pain, it's because gentleness failed too many times before." For a long moment, I couldn't breathe, because that was exactly what I'd told Thomas once, years ago, when Claire was still small and stubborn and full of defiance. Maybe the universe recycles truths until someone listens. The sun slipped lower, turning the water bronze. Claire wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I'm angry, Mom. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, but I also know I can't hate you. I tried." "I don't need your forgiveness," I said quietly. "Just your understanding someday. I'm not there yet. I know." We sat in silence again, the wind flattening her hair against her cheek. Finally, she whispered, "What now?" "Now," I said, "we go home." The drive back was quiet. She stared out the window the whole time, watching waves collapse and rebuild again and again. Maybe that's what we were doing too. When we reached the beach house, the porch light was already on. She hesitated at the door. "Everything looks smaller," she said softly. "Things shrink when we outgrow our illusions," I replied. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and old wood. I poured tea while she stood by the window, staring at the horizon. "You ever think Dad's still watching us?" she asked. "Every day." "What do you think he'd say about all this?" I smiled sadly. He'd say we both finally learned how to listen. Later that night, I found her in the study. Thomas's old room. She was holding his journal, reading aloud one of his notes. "Forgive your children before they ask, and forgive yourself after they leave." When she noticed me in the doorway, she closed the book gently. "Mom," she said, "do you still have that old company you and Dad built together? The one that owns the properties?" "Yes, why?" Her eyes were tired but clear. I want to help you manage it. Learn what Dad taught you. Maybe I can do something good with it this time." I hesitated. Business isn't a cure for guilt. "It's not guilt," she said firmly. "It's purpose." And in that moment, I saw it. The first flicker of the woman she was meant to become, not the girl who'd run away with someone else's dream. Before she went to bed, she stood in the doorway of my room. "I still don't forgive you," she said softly, "but I think I understand why you did it." "That's enough for now," I said. She nodded. "Maybe tomorrow it'll hurt less. Maybe tomorrow we'll start again." After she left, I sat alone in the glow of the bedside lamp. The sea murmured outside like an old prayer. I reached for Thomas's photo and whispered, "She's coming back to herself." And for the first time in months, I allowed the tears I'd been holding to fall. Quiet, unhurried, cleansing. Because reckoning isn't just for those who are wrong, it's for those who tried to be right and still caused pain. I wiped my eyes, blew out the lamp, and let the darkness settle. Gentle, forgiving, final. The days that followed felt softer, like the world was learning to exhale again. The storm between us had passed, but the air still smelled of rain. Claire woke before dawn each morning, same as always, but now she dressed in neat work clothes and carried a folder instead of a dish rag. She'd taken over one corner of the dining table, the same place where she once signed the papers that nearly cost us everything. That irony wasn't lost on either of us. She read bank statements, color-coded spreadsheets, and muttered about tax filings. Every so often, she'd look up and ask a question. "What's depreciation again?" "How did Dad handle tenant disputes?" And I'd answer, not as a mother, but as a partner. It was strange, that shift. Once she'd been the child I had to shield from consequence. Now she was a woman studying consequence like scripture. By late winter, the properties were thriving again. The downtown building finally had heating fixed. The tenants organized a small celebration in the lobby. They invited us both. Claire spent the whole afternoon coordinating repairs, smoothing things out with the contractors. When she introduced herself, she said, "I help manage the place with my mother." Not for me, with. 2 letters are different, but enough to melt years of distance. On the drive home, she said quietly, "You know, it's easier to face people when you're doing honest work. Nobody cares about the headlines after that." I smiled. Honesty has a short memory but a strong backbone. She laughed. "That sounds like something Dad would have said." It probably was. Then she turned serious. "Do you ever think he'd be proud of us?" "Every day," I said. The next morning, a letter arrived from a journalist, one of those local columnists chasing stories about fallen elites making a comeback. She'd somehow learned about the repairs, about Claire's return, about me. I tore it open at the kitchen counter. Claire came in halfway through reading. "Who's it from?" "Someone fishing for redemption stories," I said. Her expression hardened. "We're not giving them one." I looked at her, steady, confident, protective now. "No," I agreed. "We're writing our own." She smiled faintly. "Then let's keep it private." That afternoon, we visited the nursing home to see Mrs. Grant, who'd fallen and broken her hip. The old woman's eyes lit up when she saw us. "Margaret, Claire, look at you two, like nothing ever happened." Claire laughed. "A few things happened, Mrs. Grant." "Well, life's dull without a scandal or two," she quipped, and the 3 of us laughed until the nurse came in to hush us. It was the first time I saw Claire laugh without guilt, just light and free. Weeks passed. The beach house started to smell of varnish and lemon oil instead of salt and neglect. One evening, as I passed her room, I saw her sitting on the floor surrounded by boxes, Thomas's journals, the old photo albums, his blueprints. "What's all this?" I asked. "I'm digitizing everything," she said, smiling up at me. "I want to archive Dad's work properly, maybe even start a foundation in his name, something that helps small contractors who get cheated by big firms." I leaned against the doorframe, watching her fingers glide gently over her father's handwriting. "You always did inherit his stubbornness," I said. And your sense of justice, she added. I laughed softly. Dangerous combination. The following week, one of our tenants called about a problem, a burst pipe flooding the lower hall. Claire and I went together. The hallway was chaos, ankle-deep water, panicked tenants, a plumber swearing under his breath. Before I could speak, Claire took charge. Shut off the main valve. You get towels from the laundry. Mrs. Evans, please take the children upstairs. Her voice was clear, calm, and commanding. She didn't flinch at the mess, didn't hide behind me. When it was over, soaked and freezing, the tenants applauded her. She turned to me, cheeks flushed. Guess I learned something from all those storms, huh? I smiled. Every flood has its lesson. That night, sitting by the fire with Coco, she said quietly, Mom, I think I finally understand what you did. Do you? You didn't break me. You just stopped protecting me from the truth. I nodded. The hardest mercy there is. She looked into the flames. For a long time, I thought love was supposed to feel warm, but maybe it's supposed to feel steady, like the tide, sometimes rough, sometimes calm, but always there. That's what your father used to say, I murmured. She smiled. Then I guess I'm finally listening. Spring arrived early that year. The beach bloomed with wildflowers that hadn't appeared since Thomas died. Claire started organizing. Community cleanups every weekend. Volunteers, kids, even fishermen joined in. People began to talk again, but not about the scandal this time. They said the Hale women were rebuilding the coast, and maybe, in some quiet way, we were rebuilding ourselves too. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Claire brought out 2 glasses of wine and sat beside me on the porch. I've been thinking, she said, when you're gone, years from now, I mean, I want to keep this place open, for families who need somewhere to start over. I looked at her, the light turning her hair to copper. You mean like a shelter? Not exactly. More like a refuge, a second-chance house, because that's what it was for me. I felt my throat tighten. That's a beautiful idea, I said softly. Your father would have loved that. She nodded. Then it settled. The Hale Foundation for Renewal. And there it was, the full circle I hadn't dared hope for. Later that night, I found a small envelope on my bedside table. Inside was a note in her handwriting. For everything you didn't say but did anyway. For teaching me that love can be fierce and still be kind. Tucked behind it was her first rent payment, $100 folded neatly. I laughed and cried all at once, because that, I realized, was our final contract signed at last, not in ink, but in growth. The next morning, when we stood together at the window watching gulls wheel over the sea, I whispered, Thomas, look at her. And for the first time since he'd gone, I didn't feel his absence like a wound. I felt it like a legacy, alive, steady, carried forward by the daughter who had finally learned how to stay. The ocean was quiet again, not the restless, moaning kind of quiet that follows a storm, but the deep, patient kind that comes after peace has decided to stay. Spring had turned into early summer. The house smelled of paint and lemon oil. The garden buzzed with bees. Life, steady and unremarkable, had finally returned, and so had we. Claire was busier than ever. The Hale Foundation for Renewal was real now. Papers signed, funds secured, tenants volunteering every weekend to repair damaged homes along the coast. The morning of the opening ceremony, she ran through the house, checking every detail twice. Mom, the press will be here in an hour, she called. Do you have the speech? In my purse, I said. And your medication? In my other purse. She sighed, exasperated but smiling. You're impossible. That's what keeps me interested. At the ribbon cutting, the entire town gathered. Children from the elementary school held handmade signs. A second chance starts here. Claire stood on the makeshift stage, sunlight warming her face. She spoke without notes. When I lost everything, I thought it was the end of my story. But sometimes You have to lose what blinds you to see what stays. My mother taught me that rebuilding isn't just about wood and nails. It's about courage and forgiveness. So today, this house, this foundation, is for anyone who forgot they were worth saving. The crowd applauded, and when she turned to me, eyes shining, I saw Thomas there. In the way she stood, the way her voice didn't shake. I hadn't realized until then how long I'd been waiting to see that. That night, the volunteers left, the music faded, and we sat alone on the porch. The sea shimmered under the moonlight like liquid glass. Claire leaned her head on my shoulder. You know, I still think about him. Ryan. So do I admitted. Not the man, but the part of you that believed him. She nodded. That part's gone now, but I'm grateful for what it taught me. Pain is an efficient teacher, I said softly. And forgiveness? I smiled faintly. That's the graduation. Days folded into weeks. The foundation thrived. The town whispered less and helped more. People stopped calling her the fraud's wife and started calling her Miss Hale. But quietly, beneath all that sunlight, my body began to slow down. The doctor called it age catching up. I called it time keeping its promise. Claire noticed, of course. She began hovering, pretending she wasn't. You should rest, Mom. I'm resting now. You're standing. Resting in spirit? I'd tease. But she was worried. Every time she saw me pause mid-step or catch my breath, her eyes clouded. The same eyes that had once burned with rebellion now filled with care. That's how I knew my work was done. One evening, after she'd gone to bed, I sat alone in the study and opened Thomas's journal again. Inside was a quote I hadn't noticed before. The sea doesn't end when the tide pulls back. It just begins somewhere else. I closed the book and whispered, You always knew how to say goodbye without saying it. Then I wrote one last letter, addressed to Claire. When the tide changes again, don't stop building. Don't stop forgiving. I'm not leaving you behind. I'm just going ahead to make sure the view is clear. I sealed it and placed it in the top drawer of her desk. The next morning, the light was softer than usual, the air still. Claire found me sitting by the window, tea half finished, book open. She thought I was asleep. And in a way, she was right. The funeral was small. The town came, quiet and reverent, standing beneath gray skies that promised rain but held back out of respect. Claire didn't cry at first. She stood at the edge of the bluff, holding the urn like something both fragile and unbreakable. Then she looked out at the sea and whispered, She said the tide always brings you back. And finally, she let the wind take me. Ash scattered across the waves, swirling, shimmering, dissolving into the same water where Thomas and I had once built our first dream. Weeks later, she reopened the beach house as part of the foundation. On the porch, a brass plaque gleamed in the sun. The Hale House for those who lost their way, but found the shore again. She gave tours to new families, taught budgeting to single mothers, helped fishermen apply for small loans. She laughed easily now, spoke kindly, and carried herself like someone who had finally forgiven life for being difficult. And every evening, she walked down to the water's edge, barefoot, fearless. Sometimes she'd speak aloud, as if I were still sitting beside her. Mom, she'd say, we made it. And somewhere, in the endless rhythm of the sea, I always answered, because love, once it learns endurance, never really dies. It just changes form, like water, like tide, like legacy. Did you like this story? And from which city or country are you listening? I always love reading your comments. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. If this one touched your heart, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. Your support helps us bring more true stories about love, loss, and second chances. And if you'd like to support the channel even more, you can send a super thanks. It truly means the world. With love and respect, we'll see you in the next life story.